It was a quiet June afternoon when my phone buzzed on the desk. The name flashing on the screen froze me in place. Henry Collins. For a second, the air seemed to thicken. The sound of the ceiling fan blurred, my breath caught halfway. After 20 years, that name could still fold my heart like paper gone damp. I let it ring once, twice. Then, against my better judgment, I picked up. "Eleanor." His voice trembled, half breath, half plea. "I'm sick. I need your help. Just this once." The words slid through the receiver like a cold knife. Behind me, the window hummed with summer heat. Outside, someone was watering their garden. The smell of wet soil rose, the same smell I remembered from the day he walked out. On my work table, dozens of cards hung on the drying rack. Handmade notes from my students. "You. Congratulations. Get well soon." But one card caught the light, embossed gold letters on cream paper, perfectly centered. "Good luck." I stared at it for a long time. The room felt suddenly smaller, the kind of silence that presses against your ribs. My fingers moved before my mind did. I reached for an envelope, slipped the card inside, and wrote his address from memory. The handwriting hadn't changed, the muscle still remembered the old habit of loving him. No return address, no signature, just 2 words. The neatest ones I'd ever written. When I sealed the envelope, I noticed my reflection in the silver scissors beside me. Calm. Too calm. As if the years had taught me to bleed without leaving a mark. I placed the envelope on the table, next to a cup of cold coffee, and whispered to myself, "There are debts that can only be paid in silence." Then I turned off the phone. Outside, the sprinkler clicked on again, soft and rhythmic, like the pulse of something finally letting go. I met Henry Collins when I was 32, the year I finally believed my hands could build a future. I was working at a small card design shop in Seattle, a place that always smelled of glue, ink, and lavender-scented paper. World. Then was soft. Ivory cardstock stacked by the window, ribbons curled like breath, the quiet hum of the paper press. He walked in one afternoon carrying a camera and a grin that felt rehearsed yet disarming. "You make promises look beautiful," he said, flipping through my display of wedding cards. His voice had that low photographer's confidence, like someone used to telling people how to stand, where to look, when to smile. I laughed, embarrassed. Within a week he was buying me coffee, within a month he was calling me his partner. In art, in life, in everything that comes next. We rented a small studio downtown. The rent was steep, but I paid it. I bought the new printer, the matte laminator, the lighting rig he said he needed for artistic shoots. By the end of that summer, I had spent nearly $40,000, my savings from 10 years of working double shifts and skipping vacations. He told me it was an investment in us. Back then, the word "us" was enough to make any cost sound reasonable. Every wedding invitation I designed carried someone else's vows. Together forever, 2 hearts, 1 soul, till death. Do us part. But my own card never got printed. It stayed a draft in my sketchbook, a half-drawn heart penciled beside his name. I didn't realize I was designing for ghosts. Brides and grooms I'd never meet, promises I'd never receive. One night, I stayed late at the studio, balancing invoices. That's when I found it, the receipt for a brand new camera. The buyer's name, Laura James. Same model Henry had been talking about for weeks. When he came in the next morning, smelling of aftershave that wasn't mine, I asked quietly, "Who's Laura?" He blinked once, too long, then smiled. That practiced photographer's smile. "Don't start, Eleanor. You're too sensitive." Too sensitive. 2 words that folded me smaller than the paper I worked with. I told myself he was right. Yeah, maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was lucky he'd chosen me at all. So I swallowed it. The doubt, the humiliation, the tiny scream inside my ribs. I went back to work, cutting ribbons, printing names, polishing other people's happiness. The first time he didn't come home, I stayed up making cards until dawn. I thought if I kept my hands moving, the ache would stay quiet. By sunrise, The floor was covered in gold foil and paper dust. It looked like a party after everyone had gone home. He returned the next afternoon, kissed my forehead and said, "You worry too much." I nodded. I always nodded. The paper press became my ritual. Originally, I used it to flatten rose petals Henry had given me. "To keep the memory alive," he said. After he left, I used it to press letters I never sent. They dried stiff and quiet, like the heart I was trying to save. I stacked them in boxes under my bed. "I miss you, I forgive you, I wish I didn't." Every few months I'd take them out, feel the weight of the paper, and wonder if silence could rot. People say heartbreak is loud. Plates breaking, doors slamming, sobs echoing in hallways. Mine wasn't. Mine was the slow hiss of the laminator, the steady crunch of the press, the faint scent of burnt glue when the machine overheated. Heartbreak, for me, was repetition, doing the same gentle thing over and over until the tenderness turned mechanical. When Henry finally left for good, no fight, no goodbye, just a note on my desk. I found myself staring at the machines we'd bought together. The printer, the lights, the camera tripod still standing like a skeleton in the corner. I unplugged everything. The silence that followed was deafening, but it also felt like the first breath after surfacing from deep water. I took one of the roses he'd given me, brown at the edges, brittle, and placed it inside the paper press. The lever creaked as I pulled it down. That sound, the slow, deliberate closing, was the sound of me deciding that love shouldn't need proof. Now, whenever I teach my students how to make cards, I show them that old press. I tell them it's vintage, a gift from the past. I never say whose hands once helped me carry it. But sometimes, when the room is quiet and the afternoon light slants across the table, I still hear that creak. Not painful anymore. Just a memory folding itself neatly away. I turned 35 on a rainy Thursday. The shop was almost empty that week, and I had promised myself a small celebration. Nothing fancy, just a new stack of imported paper and a box of dark chocolates. Instead, I stayed late, alone, making 100 cards. Each one had his name embossed in gold. Henry Collins. Different fonts, different shades of cream, serif, cursive, bold, italic, as if by changing the typeface I could rewrite the ending. I lined them up across the long table until the whole studio glowed faintly, like a wedding no one came to. By midnight, the city lights outside had turned the window into a mirror. I saw myself there, a woman covered in glitter dust and denial. Not a single card was sent. They stayed in their envelopes, blank inside, like lungs that never learned how to exhale. A month later, the shop went bankrupt. I packed what was left of my tools, scissors, brushes, the paper press, into 2 boxes and moved into a small attic apartment overlooking a grocery store. It smelled of coffee and rain. Sometimes I'd mix the leftover grounds with water and use it as ink. Brown ink. Warm, imperfect, human. I told myself, no more red. No more blood-colored ink. If I had to draw again, I'd use the shade of something that could still wake me up in the morning. That winter, a community center nearby asked if I'd teach children how to make notebooks. I almost said no. My hands were still stiff from holding on to the past too long, but I went. Mostly because the room was heated and I was tired of talking only to myself. The first class was chaos. Glue everywhere, scissors clattering, paper torn in half by accident and laughter. Their joy was loud, unfiltered. It scared me a little. I used the old wedding card paper, thick ivory sheets that had once waited for vows. The kids cut them up, folded them, stapled them together into tiny journals. Every time I heard the click of a stapler, it felt like a heartbeat restarting. One evening, it rained again. The roof leaked, the power flickered, and we worked by candlelight. A little girl, maybe 8, freckles, missing a front tooth, held up a sheet and sniffed. "Miss Eleanor, why does this paper smell like tears?" I froze, scissors in hand. There was no good answer, so I smiled and said softly, "Because it got wet once, but it never fell apart." She nodded, as if that made perfect sense, and went back to gluing her cover. That night, after everyone left, I stayed behind. The floor was scattered with scraps. Half letters, bits of ribbon, tiny hearts cut from my old designs. I swept them into a pile and thought, maybe this is what healing looks like. Small, uneven pieces that somehow make a new page. When I got home, I opened one of the notebooks the children had made for me. On the first page, in crooked handwriting, someone had written, "Thank you for the pretty sadness." I laughed through tears. Pretty sadness. Maybe that's all I'd ever been good at making. But that night, I didn't feel like a woman abandoned. I felt like a woman who had finally learned what to do with broken paper. It was last spring when I first saw his name again. Not on my phone this time, but splashed across the newsfeed. Wedding photographer Henry Collins accused of fraud. Dozens of angry brides left comments beneath the headline. They said he'd taken their deposits and disappeared. Someone uploaded a photo of his old studio, lights torn down, window boarded up. I stared at the screen for a long time, the cursor blinking like a slow heartbeat. Somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered, "So this is how his stories end too, unfinished prints, unpaid promises." By evening, my inbox chimed. From Henry Collins. Subject, "Please, Eleanor." I opened it. The words were short, desperate, stripped of his old confidence. "Eleanor, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from. But I'm ruined. The company's gone. The lawyers want blood. You were always the only one who believed in me. I need your help. Just this once. Please. H." The letter ended without a signature. Even his name felt hollow now. Just an initial trying to crawl back into meaning. I didn't reply. I just sat there, watching the cursor blink until it looked like a tiny metronome marking the rhythm of a heart I no longer had for him. Outside, the rain tapped softly against the window. I got up, walked to the cabinet where I kept my old designs, the ghosts of another life. Behind stacks of student work and test prints was a small wooden box. Inside lay a single wedding card. Cream-colored, embossed with gold leaves, the kind we used to sell to couples. But this one was special. It bore our names, printed years ago in his handwriting. Henry Collins and Eleanor Miles. Wondry, no location, no vows. Just empty space waiting for a day that never came. I ran my finger across the blank line meant for the date, and for the first time, it didn't sting. It just felt absurd. That I had once believed we could schedule forever. I could almost hear his old voice saying, "We'll pick the date when we're ready." Good art takes time. He'd said that about everything. Our future, his debts, the lies. Good art takes time. But good people, I learned, don't take advantage of time, or of others. The next morning, I printed his email and tucked it into the same box, next to the unfinished card. Two relics of a story that had already expired. The old and the new. One, a promise, one, a plea. I thought about replying, maybe offering a few words of comfort. But every sentence I drafted sounded like an apology. Not from him, but from me. And I'd apologized enough in that lifetime. So instead, I turned off the computer, made myself coffee, and went back to cutting paper. The blade hissed through the cardstock. Clean, sharp, final. Later that week, a student showed me a headline on her phone. Former photographer Henry Collins declares bankruptcy, facing multiple lawsuits. She didn't know who he was to me. She just said, "People like that always get caught eventually." I smiled faintly, the way you do when life finishes a sentence you were too tired to say out loud. That night, I took out the card again. The gold lettering had dulled with age, the paper slightly warped from humidity. Still beautiful, still lying. I thought about burning it, but that felt too dramatic, too kind. So I slid it back into its box. Let it stay there, a fossil of my own foolishness. Some things don't deserve closure. They deserve containment. Before going to bed, I looked at the email one last time. His words, "You were always the only one who believed in me," echoed like a sad joke. I whispered to the empty room, and that was my mistake. Then I hit delete. The screen went blank, and for once, so did my mind. That night, I couldn't sleep. The apartment was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the rain ticking against the window like a clock reminding me it was time. I got up, barefoot on the cold tile, and opened the drawer under my work table. Inside were the letters, hundreds of them, pressed flat between sheets of wax paper, tied with a silk ribbon that had long since lost its shine. Letters I'd written to him but never sent. Letters that smelled faintly of ink, coffee, and old hope. Guy untied the ribbon. It came undone too easily, like something relieved to be released. I carried the whole bundle to the kitchen sink. For a second, I hesitated. Old habits of sentimentality whispering, what if someday you need to remember? But remembering had become my disease. So I turned on the tap. The first sheet darkened, the words bleeding slowly, looping into swirls of color. The black ink turned to rust, then to a soft pink, as if the paper itself were bleeding out the past. By the time I reached the last letter, the water in the sink had turned pale rose. It looked almost beautiful, like a wound learning how to close. I watched the pieces dissolve and whispered to no one, "If I save him, who's going to save me?" The question hung in the air, heavier than the steam from the hot water. Another voice, smaller, sharper, followed right after. If compassion is a trap, why do I keep crawling back into it? I didn't have an answer, but the silence that followed felt like one. When the water cleared, I dried my hands and walked to my desk. There was a new stack of blank paper waiting, crisp, untainted. I pulled one sheet out and began to write, not to him, but to myself. Paper Soul. That was the title. Underneath, I wrote in smaller letters, a class for women who mailed their hearts to the wrong address. The idea had been circling my mind for years, too timid to land. Now it arrived with purpose. I would teach women to make peace with paper, to cut, fold, and rebuild their stories the way I had rebuilt mine. Not to forget, but to reframe. Not to erase, but to own. I stayed up until dawn planning lessons. Week 1. Writing what you never said. Week 2. Turning regret into texture. Week 3. Folding forgiveness into form. By sunrise, the apartment smelled of glue and coffee and a little bit of freedom. When I finally stepped outside, the rain had stopped. The street was washed clean. The air new. The garbage truck rumbled by, collecting last night's waste. I dropped the soggy remains of my letters into the bin. They were lighter than I expected, as if paper, once it's done carrying sorrow, weighs almost nothing. That afternoon, I called the community center where I used to volunteer. "Do you still have that art room?" I asked. "Yes, but it's mostly storage now," the coordinator replied. "Then I'll take it," I said. He laughed. "Take it for what?" "For something new." The next day, I unlocked the door to that dusty room. Stacks of cardboard leaned against one wall. Old paints and ribbons littered the tables. I opened the windows, let the air in. The sunlight hit the dust, turning it gold. It looked almost holy, like proof that decay can still shine when light finds it. I cleaned for hours, humming under my breath, something I hadn't done in years. By evening, I hung a sign on the door, "A workshop, Wednesdays and Fridays. Bring your scars, I'll bring the glue." That night, as I washed the ink off my hands, I realized something startling. I wasn't shaking. Not the way I used to when his name slipped into conversation or memory. 20 years I'd spent trembling, with anger, with grief, with the endless reflex to fix what broke me. And now, just like that, my hands were steady. Before going to bed, I wrote one last thing in my notebook. Not a letter, not a goodbye, just a line to mark the shift. For the first time in 20 years, I don't flinch when I hear his name. Then I turned off the light, and the darkness felt, finally, like rest, not absence. Henry didn't stop. Even after the unanswered email, even after months of silence, he kept calling. First once a week, then every other day, then every night. Each voicemail was a little shorter, a little rougher, his voice thinning like a photograph left too long in the sun. "Eleanor, please. You know I'm not a bad man. I'm sick. I have no one else. You won't let me die, will you?" I would listen to the first second of each message, just long enough to hear his breath. Then press delete. A reply. No explanation. Not even anger anymore, only a tired stillness, like the air before a storm. In the classroom, my students were bent over their work, glue sticks and scraps of paper spreading across the tables like confetti after a quiet parade. The smell of fresh cardstock and hot tea filled the room. It should have been peaceful, but inside me, a small tension curled, as if the sound of my phone vibrating in my bag could travel straight into my bloodstream. I kept the ringer off, but I could still feel it, like a phantom limb. The life I had amputated still trying to move. That afternoon we were making unsent cards, an exercise I'd designed for week 3. Each student wrote a message they never planned to mail, folded it into an envelope, and sealed it with wax. As I walked between tables, a young woman, maybe 24, bright scarf around her neck, raised her hand. Her fingers were sticky with glue, her eyes soft with something she didn't want to name. "Miss Eleanor," she asked, "have you ever sent a card and hoped nobody would answer?" Her question stopped me mid-step. Around us, paper rustled, scissors clicked. Outside, the wind rattled the window frame. I looked at her and smiled, small but real. "Yes," I said, and it was the most important card of my life. The room went still for a moment. No one asked what card it was. As the students sealed their envelopes, I sat at my desk and opened my own phone. 12 missed calls, 3 voicemails, all from him. I pressed play on the latest one. His voice was hoarse now, stripped of charm. "Eleanor, I'm sorry. I'm sick. I'm scared. Please pick up, just once." I pressed delete before he could finish. Then I set the phone face down and reached for a piece of paper. I began to fold it slowly, creasing each edge with my thumb. The room filled with the small, comforting sounds of making, paper sliding over paper, wax dripping onto seals, the low hum of the heater. But beneath it all, I could feel a storm building. Not in the sky, but in the space where my past and present touched. Henry's voice on the voicemail was no longer the man who had charmed me. It was a stranger wearing his name. And yet some part of me still flinched at his pain, like an old wound aching in the rain. When the class ended, the students filed out with their unsent cards tucked into their bags like tiny secrets. I stayed behind to clean up, picking stray ribbons off the floor, wiping glue from the tables, stacking the leftover paper. At the bottom of one pile, I found a single blank envelope, still warm from someone's hands. I held it up to the light. Empty. Waiting. I thought of Henry's messages and felt a strange calm settle over me. I wasn't going to fill that envelope. I wasn't going to answer. Some silences are not cruelty. Some silences are boundaries. I slipped the envelope into my drawer and turned off the lights. Outside, the sky was heavy and gray, the kind of clouds that don't move but promise something coming. I pulled my coat tighter and whispered to myself, "Let the storm come." I'm not the same paper anymore, and for the first time in days, I didn't feel my phone vibrating, just the steady rhythm of my own pulse, quiet, firm, unafraid. The day Henry came, the sky over Portland was the color of old paper. Through the classroom windows, rain streaked thin lines down the glass, blurring the world outside into watercolor. Inside, my students were bent over their projects, folding and gluing, the quiet scrape of scissors a steady heartbeat. Then someone whispered, "Miss Eleanor, there's a man at the window." I looked up. Henry stood on the other side of the glass, his shoulders hunched under a coat too big, his face pale, cheeks hollow. He looked like a photograph left out in the rain, the edges curling, the image fading. He pressed a hand against the pane as if to steady himself. The room went still. Students exchanged glances, murmurs rising like a breeze. I could feel their eyes flicking between me and the stranger outside, waiting for a cue. I reached for the card on my desk, the one I had kept aside for months. Dream paper, gold letters. Good luck. It was cool against my palm as I walked to the door. When I opened it, the smell of wet pavement came in with him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the rain dripping from his coat onto the linoleum. Then he said, hoarse, "Eleanor, you're really going to shut me out like this?" He tried to smile, but it cracked halfway. "You used to promise you'd always be there for me. Did you forget?" I held the card between us like a small shield. My voice was steady. "I know. I didn't forget. I just fixed the grammar. It's no longer, 'I'll always be there for you.' It's, 'I once was there for you.'" His eyes flickered. For a second, the charm came back, the same look that had made me believe in us. He stepped closer, reaching for my hand. "Don't do this," he said. "You know me. You know what we had. I'm sick, Eleanor. I have nothing left." He gripped my fingers, the bones of his hand sharp under my skin. When he started to kneel, instinct, not pity, made me pull back. I stepped aside, pointing to the board on the wall where I'd written today's lesson. "In this room we mend our own hearts, not the hands that tore them." The students, still seated, had fallen silent. I could feel them watching, their pens and scissors paused mid-air. They didn't know the whole story, but they knew enough to sense the weight of it. Henry's face flushed. He glanced at the room, then back at me, his voice rising just enough to tremble. "After everything I did for you," he began. I cut him off, softly but firmly. "Everything you did to me." He blinked, as if the preposition had landed like a slap. He tried another tactic, his voice sweet again. "Eleanor, don't humiliate me in front of these kids. I'm not the villain you think. We had dreams, remember?" I took a slow breath, feeling the card still in my hand. Rain rattled harder against the window, a percussion for the moment. "Yes," I said. "We had dreams. And you cashed mine to fund yours." A murmur moved through the students like a low wind. Henry glanced at them, then back at me, his jaw tight. "You think you're so strong now," he hissed. "But you wouldn't even be here without me. I made you who you are." The words should have hurt. Instead, they slid off me like water off waxed paper. I even smiled, small and tired. "No, Henry. You showed me who I refused to be." For a moment I saw the boyish man I'd once loved flicker behind the gauntness. But pity is not the same as permission. I held out the card. He didn't take it. "Good luck," I said simply. "No signature? No return address. Just 2 words between us." His hand hovered but didn't close. "You're cruel," he whispered. I shook my head. "No, I'm careful." Behind me, a chair scraped, one of the students shifting, eyes wide. Henry flinched at the sound. He straightened, pulled his coat tighter, and finally took the card. His fingers trembled as he read the embossed letters. I thought of all the times I had given without being asked. Of all the nights I had stayed up folding cards no one would ever open. This, at last, was a card I was sending on my own terms. He tried one last time, his voice a rasp. "You don't have to do this. I'm sick, Eleanor. I'm dying." I met his eyes. There was no anger left in me, only the clarity of a boundary. "I don't owe you my survival, Henry. I owe myself a proper goodbye." Silence stretched. Even the rain seemed to pause. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. His footsteps faded down the hall until there was only the soft rustle of paper in the room again. I stood there for a beat, cardless now, empty-handed but lighter. The students watched me, waiting for something. I went back to the front of the room, picked up a scrap of ribbon, and smiled. "All right," I said, my voice even. "Where were we?" They bent back over their projects. The sound of scissors and glue returned, steady, ordinary. Life resumed. Inside me, a quiet voice whispered what my mouth hadn't yet said aloud. "I don't owe him. I owe myself a farewell done right." And for the first time, it felt true. The next week, I woke to a dozen unread messages, all with the same headline. "Old lover turns on ex. Artist accused of revenge project." Henry had gone public. He'd told some local blog that my class, Paper Soul, was a petty stunt, a workshop built to humiliate him. He painted himself as the tragic man betrayed by a bitter woman, still obsessed, still vindictive. He was always good at storytelling. He just never learned how to tell the truth. At first, I laughed. Then the laughter stuck somewhere in my throat. By noon, the phone started ringing. Reporters, strangers, former clients. Someone had taken a photo of me standing by the classroom window the day he showed up. They'd cropped out the students and written their own caption. Elderly woman exacts revenge on her ex-lover through art therapy. It spread faster than mold in damp paper. The comments were worse. Half of them cruel, half pitying, all of them wrong. She must still love him. At her age? How pathetic. These art classes are just therapy for the broken. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. The internet feeds on noise. Silence confuses it. But silence doesn't stop consequences. By the end of that week, 3 students withdrew from my class. A local sponsor pulled funding for the community room. Even the cafe next door stopped displaying our flyers. Bad publicity, the owner said gently, eyes avoiding mine. I walked home under a sky that looked like bruised parchment, purple, torn at the edges. Each step felt heavier, as if the city itself were siding with him. That night, I sat at my work table and stared at the scraps of paper left behind by my students. Some torn, some crumpled, others half-finished. I started to collect them. Not to throw away, but to fix. I took the torn hearts, the broken folds, the fragments that had lost their shape, and I began to glue, slowly, deliberately, piece by piece. It wasn't pretty. The glue bled out of the seams, the colors didn't match. But when I was done, it looked alive. I wrote a line at the bottom, in brown ink, "Love doesn't fail. Only the keeper forgets how to fold it right." The next morning, I pinned that piece on the classroom board. When the remaining students came in, they stood around it quietly. No one asked about the rumors. They didn't need to. They saw the truth hanging there, patched together with care and defiance. One of them, a shy woman named Carla, touched the edge of the collage. "Is this what we'll be doing today?" she asked. I nodded. Yes. Today we fix what others say is broken. That afternoon, Henry posted again. This time, he uploaded an old photo of us from 20 years ago. My younger self smiling, standing behind his camera. He captioned it, "She used to believe in me. What happened to kindness?" The comments flooded in. Maybe she's jealous. Maybe she's crazy. Maybe she should let go. But beneath all the noise, one stranger wrote, "Maybe she finally did." That one comment stayed with me like a candle in the dark. Over the following days, small acts of cruelty began to appear. Someone spray-painted LIAR on the mailbox outside my building. Anonymous letters arrived, full of clipped words from newspapers, vindictive, lonely, washed up. I recognized the tactic. Henry had always preferred others to do his shouting for him. The hardest part wasn't the slander, it was the echoes. Every insult sounded like something he had once said in private. "You're too emotional. You make everything about you. You'll never succeed without me." Now the world was repeating his lines back at me, louder. One evening after class, a local journalist came by. Young, nervous, holding a recorder. "Miss Miles," she said, "would you like to respond to Mr. Collins's claims?" I looked at her, her face eager, her hands trembling slightly. She reminded me of myself, the version who once believed every story deserved an ending. I smiled politely. "No," I said. "I'm done giving him sentences to hide behind." She blinked. "Then what would you say to women who've been lied about?" I thought for a moment, then pointed to the board where the collage still hung. "Glue. Patience. And better handwriting." She laughed, a little startled, a little unsure, but she wrote it down anyway. That night, I stayed late again. I printed all the hate articles, all the photos, all the comments. Then I cut them into strips, neat, even pieces, and began weaving them into a new sheet of paper. When it was done, I wrote across the center, "Paper doesn't choose what's written on it, but it decides whether to tear." It became the new poster for my class. By the end of the month, something unexpected happened. For every student who left, 2 more asked to join. Women I'd never met. Divorced, widowed, abandoned, showed up with stories tucked under their sleeves. They said they found my face online, saw the headlines, and wanted to meet the woman who didn't fight back. I told them I did fight, just quietly, with scissors and glue. They smiled, they understood. Still, at night, doubt crept in. Was I truly free of him, or still orbiting his chaos? Was my silence strength, or fear wearing a prettier dress? I thought of the card I'd handed him, the one that simply said, "Good luck." Maybe I'd sent it too early. Maybe I should have waited until I was sure the luck was mine again. But no, I reminded myself, I had already reclaimed it. Every cruel word, every rumor, every broken card I repaired was another act of quiet rebellion. One evening, as I locked up the classroom, a small package lay by the door. No name, no note. Inside, a torn photograph, the same one Henry had posted online, and a folded scrap of paper. In shaky handwriting it said, "They believed him for a while. Then they saw your work." I stood there for a long time, the paper trembling slightly between my fingers. Not from fear, from the strange weight of being seen. The next day, I pinned that note on the board beside the collage. Underneath, I wrote one final line. Even the wrong stories crumble when the right hands keep creating. And then I taught my class as usual. Scissors clicking, glue drying, laughter bubbling. Outside, the rain had stopped. The window glass caught a slice of sunlight, sharp and gold, cutting through the gray. For the first time since Henry reappeared, I felt something new. Not triumph, not vindication. Something quieter, steadier, peace with noise. It came to me on a Sunday morning, the kind of morning too calm to suspect betrayal. The light fell softly across my work table. A half-finished card waited beside my cup of tea. The phone buzzed once. A message from Carla, one of my students. "Miss Eleanor, you should hear this. It's about you." Attached was an audio file, no context. For a second, I hesitated. The older you get, the more you learn that truth rarely arrives with good news. But curiosity, that old animal, lifted its head. I pressed play. Henry's voice filled the room. Familiar, measured. That same tone he used to charm investors, brides, and me. "She's milking our story," he told someone. A journalist, judging by the background hum of a recorder. Using my name, twisting everything that happened between us to build a brand. Paper soul, that's what she calls it. Clever, right? She's turning heartbreak into PR. The interviewer chuckled softly. Henry went on, smoother now. "Ooh. She always wanted attention. Now, she's finally got it. You can print that. She loves the spotlight, always did." Click. The recording ended. I sat there a long while, staring at the steam rising from my tea until it thinned into nothing. Then, unexpectedly, I laughed. A low, rasped sound that surprised even me. Not bitter, not broken. Just, tired and free. After 20 years, the man still mistook silence for weakness and creation for manipulation. He'd never understood that art and revenge are not the same language. I printed the transcript of the interview and read it once, twice, each line like an old echo coming home to die. She loves attention. She's twisting our story. She always wanted more. He was recycling our history, editing it until he came out as the victim. But what he didn't realize was that recycling only works when the material still has strength. Our story had turned to pulp long ago. I slipped the printout into a glass frame, the kind used to display calligraphy practice sheets in class. It fit perfectly beneath the quote I'd hung on the wall months before. "Let the rumors dry." The words seemed to hum softly in the quiet room. Rumors, after all, are like wet paint. If you touch them too soon, you smear them. Better to wait. Let the air do its work. That afternoon, when the students arrived, I didn't mention the recording. Instead, I began class as usual. Showed them how to burnish gold leaf, how to smooth edges so they wouldn't curl. But as I spoke, I noticed Carla watching me, uncertain whether she'd done the right thing. During the break, she came up and whispered, "I shouldn't have sent that, should I?" I smiled. "No, you should have. It reminded me that words, even ugly ones, can be turned into texture. She didn't quite understand, but she smiled back and returned to her seat. Later, when everyone had gone, I looked again at the framed page. Henry's quotes sat beneath the glass like insects caught in amber. Preserved, but harmless. I thought about sending it to him, just a photo, with a note. Thank you for the material. But I didn't. He didn't deserve to know he'd become an exhibit. Instead, I decided to use it in my next workshop. When the world misquotes you, rewrite the sentence. That night, I walked home through streets slick with rain. The city smelled of asphalt and possibility. In the reflection of the storefronts, I saw my own outline. Steady, small, but still standing. Once, that reflection would have unsettled me. Now, it felt like company. I whispered to it. Or maybe to him. Or maybe to the version of me who still cared what he said. Go ahead, Henry. Talk. Words dry faster than ink. And I kept walking. When they said I was using heartbreak to get attention, I decided to give them something beautiful to look at. The idea came one sleepless night as I stared at the framed transcript of Henry's interview, his words trapped forever under glass. I thought, if he wants a story, I'll tell one. But it won't be about him. So I began to plan a small exhibition, nothing grand, just a single room filled with letters that were never sent. I called it Letters That Were Never Sent. Over the next 3 months, I collected 200 handwritten pieces from women across the country, strangers, students, friends of friends. Letters to lovers who had left, to fathers who had vanished, to versions of themselves they no longer were. Each one carried the trembling weight of something once unsaid. Apologies, goodbyes, unfinished confessions. They came folded in napkins, tucked inside recipe books, scribbled on receipts and scraps of wrapping paper. Some smelled faintly of perfume. Some of tears. I didn't edit them. I only framed them one by one, behind thin glass so the paper's texture still showed. Wrinkled, creased, human. At the center of the gallery, I placed a single piece. A cream card, gold letters. Good luck. The same one I had mailed to Henry, or rather, for him. The envelope was still sealed, returned by the post office months ago with the red stamp. Address unknown. It seemed fitting. I mounted it in a transparent box, under a cone of soft amber light. No caption, no explanation. Just 2 words glowing quietly in a room full of confessions. When the invitations went out, I didn't expect much. A handful of artists, maybe some students, a few curious locals. But the story had already made its way through whispers and algorithms. By opening night, the gallery was full. Women came dressed in quiet colors, men came out of curiosity, journalists came hoping for a headline. I greeted each of them at the door with a simple instruction. Please, read slowly. Every silence here once belonged to someone. The letters hung in careful order. From forgiveness to fury. From heartbreak to release. Visitors moved slowly, mouths half open, as if afraid to disturb the air. A mother read a note written by her daughter, unknowingly. A young man cried in front of a letter addressed, "To the one who taught me how to disappear." Someone whispered, "It feels like standing inside a heartbeat." And there, at the center, Henry's card gleamed softly. Small, almost shy, but impossible to ignore. The photographers circled it, the light catching the embossed words like a secret refusing to fade. A journalist approached me during the reception. He looked nervous, like he'd been sent to dig up scandal and accidentally found reverence. "Miss Miles," he said, "is this about him?" About Henry Collins?" I smiled, not cruelly but kindly, like a teacher answering a child. "No," I said, "it's about all the things women were told to keep to themselves." He hesitated. "And that card in the middle?" I looked at it. The gold glinting softly under the light. "That one's just a reminder," I said. Sometimes silence writes the most honest letter. After the opening, the reviews came in. Cautious, reverent. A room of unwritten histories. Where pain becomes paper and paper becomes peace. Henry's name didn't appear in a single article. That was the point. He had written his version of our story in gossip and lies. I had rewritten it in the ink of 200 women who had lived something far bigger than us. The next morning, I walked into the gallery before it opened. The air still smelled faintly of glue and candle wax from the night before. I stood in front of the good luck card, alone. The light caught the paper just so, soft gold edges, like sunrise through mist. I reached out, touched the glass gently. It was cool, smooth, unbothered. The kind of quiet that doesn't ask for forgiveness, only acknowledgement. Or even now, I whispered, and for the first time, it felt true. As I locked the door and stepped into the street, a breeze lifted the corners of the flyers on the window. They read, "Letters that were never sent, curated by Eleanor Miles." Below it, someone had scrawled in pen, "Some letters don't need an address. They just need witnesses." I smiled. Because that was exactly the kind of message I had spent a lifetime trying to deliver. The gallery smelled of paper and candle wax, a scent I'd come to associate with both birth and burial. Every wall gleamed with letters. Cream, ivory, pale blue, yellowed with age, glowing beneath the amber lights. Each one a confession, a farewell, a fragment of truth finally freed. It was the opening night of letters that were never sent. The room pulsed softly with whispers and camera flashes. Women in linen dresses stood side by side with reporters, art critics, and curious strangers. I watched them move, their heads tilting in silence, lips trembling at certain phrases, some tracing words on the glass as though they could feel the pulse behind the ink. And then I saw him. Henry Collins. He stood at the entrance, thinner than I remembered, a shadow trimmed into human shape. His hair, once neat and glossy, had gone uneven, his face sharp as broken porcelain. But the smile, that old practiced smile, still knew how to enter a room before he did. He walked in without hesitation, hands in his pockets, scanning the crowd as if the place belonged to him. A ripple moved through the visitors. Recognition, gossip, curiosity. Phones tilted. Cameras blinked. Even now, he had that magnetic pull, the gift of turning any silence into spotlight. I stayed by the far wall, next to the central display. The good luck card, sealed in its glass case, the room's quiet heart. Henry approached slowly, his steps measured, deliberate. When he reached me, his smile tightened, practiced. "You really did it," he said. "You turned our story into an exhibit." His voice was low but sharp enough to slice through the murmur of the crowd. A few people turned to listen. I met his eyes. Not cold, not angry, just still. "It's not our story, Henry. It's everyone's." He glanced around, taking in the walls of letters. Then, leaning closer, he whispered. The same tone he once used when selling dreams. "Wait, Eleanor, you're using me. All of this sympathy, this fame, it's built on what we had." His breath smelled faintly of whiskey and old bitterness. I could feel eyes watching, the hush spreading through the room. Someone lifted a phone. Yeah. I straightened. My hands didn't shake. They hadn't in a long time. "No," I said, my voice clear enough to travel. "You're not the story. You're just one of hundreds of letters I never sent." The word seemed to land somewhere heavy and final. A murmur rippled through the audience. Surprise, a soft exhale, the collective relief of seeing truth dressed without apology. Henry blinked, color rising in his face. He gave a short laugh, brittle. "You always had a flair for drama," he said. "Maybe that's why you never made it as an artist." I smiled, not out of cruelty, but out of recognition. There it was, the same line he'd used years ago when I'd cried in our empty studio, begging him to look at me instead of his reflection. "You said that before," I answered. "Back then I believed you. Tonight I thank you, because that failure gave me a gallery full of voices louder than yours." He opened his mouth, but the crowd was already reacting. Soft applause first, then louder. It wasn't for me exactly, it was for the feeling, the release, The moment when someone finally stands up to the ghost that once owned their silence. I stepped aside, letting the light fall fully on the good luck card in its case. "This," I said, turning to the audience, "is the only letter I ever mailed." And came back unopened. I kept it as proof that sometimes the universe handles the delivery. The room erupted, not with cheers, but with that collective murmur that feels like shared heartbeat. Camera shutters fluttered like wings. Henry stood frozen, his face twitched with something: anger, confusion, maybe shame. He looked smaller than he had when he walked in. He glanced toward the exit as though calculating escape. I took a slow breath. "You once said," I continued, "that I was nothing without you. That I needed your eyes to be seen." "Well," I gestured around the room. At the faces, the lights, the quiet strength pulsing from the walls. "I begged you to see me. Now, I let the whole world look, and I don't need you to turn your head." For a moment, everything stopped. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Then came the applause. Rolling, rising, breaking into laughter and tears. The flash of cameras painted the room white for an instant. In that burst of light, I saw Henry lower his head. He turned slowly, shoulders hunched, and walked toward the door. No words, no final look. The crowd parted for him, and when the door closed behind him, it sounded like punctuation. A soft, definite period at the end of a very long sentence. When the applause faded, I felt hands on my shoulders. Students, friends, strangers. Carla was crying openly. She whispered, "You didn't have to say his name to destroy the story." I smiled. "I didn't destroy it. I just edited the ending." We laughed. A quiet, trembling laugh that felt like air returning to lungs after years underwater. Later that night, after everyone had gone, I stayed behind to turn off the lights. The gallery was silent again, but the air still hummed with what had been said. The letters seemed to glow faintly in the dark, as if whispering to each other. I stood in front of the good luck card one last time. Its reflection shimmered faintly against the glass, my face beside it, older, steady, unafraid. I touched the case lightly. For the first time, I didn't think of him when I saw it. I thought of the women who had written to me, the ones who had sent their pain folded inside envelopes, trusting me to give it shape. They were the reason I stayed standing when he tried to drag me back into his shadows. "We did it," I whispered, not to Henry but to them. We turned the paper into armor. Outside, the rain had stopped. The streetlight reflected on the puddles like tiny mirrors. In one of them, I caught my reflection, hair silver under the glow, eyes tired but alive. I remembered how I used to beg him to photograph me, how I wanted proof that I existed in his world. Now, the world was full of proof, words, letters, stories, and none of them needed his lens. I walked home through the cool air, the city lights flickering like applause that wouldn't end. When I reached my apartment, I opened my notebook and wrote one final line before sleeping. I once begged him to see me. Now I let the world see, without asking anyone's permission. The exhibition ended on a Sunday evening, after 3 weeks of quiet miracles. 200 letters, one small room, hundreds of visitors who had walked in carrying their own invisible envelopes of pain, and left a little lighter. When the last guest departed, I locked the gallery and stood alone among the empty frames. The air smelled faintly of dust, paper, and endings, that strange perfume of closure. The spotlights dimmed one by one until only the soft lamp over the good luck card remained. Its light spilled across the floor like a sigh. I thought of the first time I'd held that card, how heavy it felt in my hand, as if 2 words could carry an entire heartbreak. Now it just looked still, not sad, not angry, just still, like something that had finished speaking. The next morning, I returned to my classroom. The tables were cluttered with bits of ribbon, scraps of foil, glue stains, the kind of mess that only art and healing can make. On my desk lay a small envelope. No name, just my initials in neat handwriting. I opened it and found a handmade card. Pressed in the center was a folded heart, cut from cream paper, perfectly symmetrical. Inside, a single line written in brown ink. "Thank you for teaching us how to fold our hearts back together, instead of throwing them away." I sat down slowly, the words blurring for a moment before they settled. Someone had left it after class the previous day, quietly, like a secret gift. I placed the card beside the good luck one. They looked nothing alike, one born of sorrow, the other of gratitude. Yet together, they told a whole story. For weeks, I had been the woman everyone wanted to interview, to quote, to turn into an emblem of survival. But fame, even the gentle kind, fades like ink in sunlight. And I didn't mind. I was tired of being a story. I just wanted to live inside the ordinary again. So I spent that day cleaning. I wiped the tables, rearranged the paper shelves, swept the floor until the sunlight caught on the small specks of glitter that refused to go. They looked like tiny stars scattered across the wood. I let them be. Around noon, Carla dropped by with coffee and leftover pastries. She looked at the empty classroom and smiled. "It feels strange without the noise, doesn't it?" I nodded. "Strange, but good. Like the pause between two songs." She hesitated, then asked, "Do you think he'll ever apologize?" I looked up at the window. Outside, the wind was moving the branches, slow and patient. "Maybe," I said, "but it wouldn't change the ending." She nodded, understanding more than she could say, and left me to the silence. That evening, I sat at my desk with a cup of tea and opened my journal, the one I hadn't touched since the exhibition began. The pages smelled faintly of old ink and peppermint. I wrote only one sentence: "Peace doesn't arrive with applause. It arrives when the lights go out and you no longer need to prove you're free." Then I closed the book and turned off the lamp. Before leaving, I walked once more to the good luck card resting in its frame. The gold letters had dulled slightly, the paper dry, edges curling like an old leaf. I touched the glass with my fingertips. Cool. Smooth. Silent. No sting this time, no echo of his voice. Just the quiet weight of something that had lived its life and chosen to rest. "You did your job," I whispered. "You carried the message." And I meant it. Not as a goodbye, but as gratitude. Even pain has its purpose when it knows where to stop. When I stepped outside, the evening air was mild, the sky pale and clear. I locked the door behind me, the sound echoing softly in the hallway. From the open window above, I could hear laughter. My students from the next class, already beginning their projects, their scissors snipping in rhythm like tiny heartbeats. The world, it seemed, had gone on. I smiled, adjusted my scarf, and walked home slowly. The streets smelled of rain and bread from the bakery down the block. A bus passed, its windows full of faces, all strangers, all stories. For once, I didn't wonder if anyone recognized me. I didn't need to be seen to feel visible. At home, I placed the folded heart card from my student on the windowsill, beside a small vase of dried lavender. The scent mixed with the night breeze drifting in through the curtains. The city glowed quietly outside, every light a tiny act of forgiveness. I poured myself another cup of tea, sat by the window, and let the silence settle. Gentle, unhurried, kind. A year later, I left Portland for Oregon, a small coastal town where the fog rolls in each morning like a gentle visitor that never stays too long. The kind of place where even the gulls sound like they're whispering. I rented an old shop with peeling blue paint and turned it into a small studio. On the door, I hand-lettered the sign myself. "Paper healing. For women who want to start again." Inside, the walls were white and empty except for one frame hanging above the front table. The good luck card. Not as a wound, not as a warning, but as a certificate of survival. The gold letters had faded a little, soft like an old scar that no longer aches. Underneath it, I painted a line in quiet gray. Not every letter needs an answer. Every morning, I opened the windows to let the salt air drift in. Students came. Widows, divorcees, young women leaving homes that no longer fit them. They arrived carrying envelopes of their own, some literal, some invisible. I taught them to make cards again. Not love forever, not be mine, not till death do us part. But new words, honest ones. I survived beautifully. Still here. Unfold gently. We worked in silence sometimes. Just the whisper of paper against paper, the rhythm of scissors, the small sighs of women remembering they had hands. One morning, a student named June, young, freckled, recently divorced, held up her finished card. It was made of recycled brown paper and stitched with red thread. Across the front, she had written in uneven calligraphy, "To the woman I'll become." She laughed nervously. "It's not perfect," she said. I smiled. "Good, nothing worth keeping ever is." She grinned, the kind that comes from somewhere deep, and kept folding. That moment, the sound of quiet joy, the sunlight catching her hair, felt holier to me than any church I'd ever stepped into. In the afternoons, after class, I sat by the window with a pot of tea, watching the ocean. Waves folding and unfolding, just like paper, never fighting their shape, always returning to it. Sometimes, the mailman brought letters from strangers who had visited the exhibition the year before. Right? They wrote things like, "Your story taught me that endings can be an art form." I stopped waiting for an apology and started writing thank yous to myself. I kept every letter in a small box beside the window. Yelva never answered them. They didn't need replies. They just needed to be witnessed. One afternoon, a new student arrived. Older, elegant, with tired eyes. She watched me arrange the paper for a while before finally asking, "Do you still make wedding invitations?" Her voice was polite, but the question carried the faintest tremor, as if she already knew the answer. I smiled. "No," I said. "I only make farewell cards now." She tilted her head. "Farewell to who?" "To anything unworthy," I said. "Sometimes, even to the person we used to." The camera light blinked red. Recording. Behind it, the room was quiet. White walls, wooden desk, a vase of dried lavender by the window. I sat where the morning sun could touch my shoulder, the same place I used to sit when waiting for his call. Now, I waited for nothing. I looked straight into the lens. Not rehearsed, not posed, just me. The age in my face, the steadiness in my eyes, the faint tremor of someone who has finally stopped trembling. "If one day," I began, "the person who once left you comes back, asking for help, for forgiveness, for one more chance." I paused. The silence hummed softly. "Remember, you don't owe gratitude for an expensive lesson." The words came slowly, clear as folded paper. "You don't need to save the one who watched you drown. You don't have to hold the hand that once let go. And you certainly don't have to play the saint in someone else's tragedy." I leaned back a little, smiling, not out of pride, but out of peace. "Just send a card," I said. "No signature. No explanation. Only 2 words. Good luck." Sometimes closure doesn't need witnesses. Sometimes it just needs paper, ink, and the quiet courage to let go without ceremony. Behind me, on the wall, the old card hung in its glass frame. The same one I once mailed, the same one that came back unopened. It wasn't a wound anymore. It was proof that even silence can be delivered. I told my students once, "We can't rewrite what was done to us, but we can decide what stays printed." That's all paper healing is. Not a school, not therapy, not even art. It's the act of taking something that tried to destroy you and folding it into shape until it can fly. Some make lanterns, some make butterflies. And every time one lifts its paper wings and floats into the air, I think, that's what freedom looks like when it remembers its pattern. I looked back at the camera. "Maybe your heartbreak still feels wet," I said. "Maybe it still sticks to your hands when you try to let go. Don't rush to dry it. Let time be the sunlight. Let the rumors, the guilt, the ache, all of it, dry on their own." My smile widened just a little. "And when you're ready, take what's left. Every letter, every broken promise, and fold it. Turn it into something that can move forward." The light flickered. Somewhere outside, the sound of a bicycle bell echoed faintly. I took a deep breath and finished. "My story ends here. But maybe, for you, it's just beginning. Because the first card you send, or don't send, might be the first one you've ever written for yourself." I reached toward the camera, as if sealing an invisible envelope. "Good luck," I whispered. Then I smiled, softly, freely,